Hey there, Mr. Usher here, doing another recorded lesson for you guys. This is for my half credit class, so those are the classes that meet either 5th period or 8th period. This will be covering the lessons, as you probably see here, from May 6th and May 9th. So that is Friday, May 6th for the 8th period, and Monday, May 9th for the 5th period, right? So if you're one of those two, you're good. If not, goodbye. Oh, no, light is on. So bright here, I didn't notice that. Anyway, what we're covering today is political psychology. I condensed this, for better or for worse, from a couple of different lessons that I did for the full credit class. But I think it's going to cover most of the main meat of what we're doing, and hopefully give you some ideas, right, for what to do for the project, if you're still kind of in the dark about that. Anyway, first, very basically, there was a video titled, "What is political psychology?" The video itself does a pretty good job of explaining. Please check it out, watch it, see what it says. Pretty straightforward. After that, we had a presentation here covering two types of personalities that are very problematic within political psychology. So let's take a quick look at that, unless it's already up here. Nope. Okay, that's an old one. Let's go. So, you'll see two sets of 3 letters here, right? These are basically acronyms, RWA and SDO, right? I'll get into exactly what these mean in just a moment, right? First, though, we want to go on a bit of a history lesson here. In the middle of the 20th century, we had, of course, World War II, right? This huge conflict involving the United States, Germany, Japan, Russia, Great Britain, Italy, any number of countries, right? It was a global conflict, right? And that kind of spurred research into what makes people do terrible, awful things to large numbers of people because, you know, a small handful of overly powerful leaders did that to many oppressed groups, such as the Romani people, the Jewish people, disabled people, people who were from other religious minorities. Yeah, it was horrific. Anyway. Oh no. There we go. So, as a metaphor for what I'm trying to explain here, to explain these two different types of personalities, I'm going to use something that I really love, because I'm a big Star Wars nerd, and that is this image here. So, the ancient Sith Lord Darth Bane, who, for those of you who are not very nerdy, came 1,000 years before these two guys, said this is essentially the essence of the Sith Order, right? The Sith are the bad guys in Star Wars. So, basically, he said, there should be two, no more, no less. One to embody power, the other to crave it. So, one to embody power, the Emperor here, big bad guy, and one to crave it, Darth Vader, his apprentice. So, that's going to come into play, right, with these two things here. But first, tiny bit more background. We have here Benito Mussolini. Basically, Mussolini was kind of the Italian equivalent of Adolf Hitler. So, right, just as Adolf Hitler had developed Nazism, which is a very, 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 very terrible ideology, Mussolini developed fascism, which you may have heard of before. And ultimately, in response to that, this psychologist here, Theodor Adorno, developed what he called the F scale, which stood for the fascist scale, basically a scale which he thought could measure people's openness or appeal towards fascism, right? Wanted to see if he could detect future people like Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, some of the questions were a little too obvious, right? I have an example here. Most of our social problems would be solved if we could somehow get rid of the immoral, crooked, and feeble-minded people. So pretty harsh, right? Adorno's thinking was that people who were high in fascism would readily believe this kind of thing, and that's probably true. But, of course, sometimes when we try to measure things in psychology, we kind of give the game away, right? If we ask too many questions like this one here, right? Oh, then we maybe give the game away by kind of indicating to the person, like, we want you to tell us you're a fascist. So, you know, a little too obvious here. People started thinking maybe we need a more subtle measure. That eventually gets us to right-wing authoritarianism, which is what RWA stands for. Basically, this was a scale developed by another psychologist, Bob Altemeyer, in 1981. He kind of tried to take a lot of the items or the statements from the F scale and make them a little bit more modern, a little bit more subtle. One example being, the established authorities generally turn out to be right about things, while the radicals and protesters are usually just loudmouths showing off their ignorance, right? And, obviously when I'm doing political psychology, I have to get a tiny bit political. I do not want to impose my beliefs on any of you. You guys are free to believe whatever you want politically. But as an example, right, many Trump supporters did, I would argue, take this view of former President Donald Trump, right? There were even members of Congress who argued that you really shouldn't trust any kind of news media. You should just get your information about what's going on directly from the president, right? Because he's the established authority, he's the person in charge. Just trust him, and it'll be fine. That kind of a thing. Essentially, people who score high on this want to weed out deviant people, people who are different, people from minority races, minority religions, people who are disabled, people who are lesbian, gay, transgender, or bisexual, right? People who are just noticeably different in any way, because they really just want everybody to be kind of following the norm and kind of being similar to each other. They don't want anybody to stick out, right? They have a high sensitivity to social threats. So if you think about controversies such as, people trying to pass laws to prevent transgender people from using the bathroom that conforms with their gender identity, or people being opposed to comprehensive sex education. This is sex education, which, essentially actually teaches teenagers such as yourself safe ways to engage in sexual activity instead of just telling them never, ever, ever have sex. So people who are high in this tend to really reflexively and intensely oppose this because, they think it's going to bring on corruption and the downfall of society. The problem is they often hold contradictory and illogical views as well, right? They kind of look out to the world, and they will espouse whatever view is going to kind of support the authority or maintain the rigid structure in society that they want to have, even if ultimately some of those views will be impossible to be true together, right? Kind of weird. Anyway, moving on. The other one is social dominance orientation. That's what SDO stands for. So this was developed by two psychologists, Felicia Prato and Jim Sedanis, in 1994, so a little over a decade after the RWA measure was developed. Sorry about that. It's thought to be the other side of the coin for right-wing authoritarianism, right? So just as right-wing authoritarianism is kind of deferring or bowing down to this established almighty ruler, the SDO kind of embodies the spirit of that ruler, basically saying, like, yeah, I believe society is hierarchical. Certain people, usually but not always, people that are like me, should be on top, right? Like these folks. And certain other people, most of the people in society, yeah, they're meant to be on the bottom, holding us up. They should be lucky that they get to hold us up, right? That's the view of this person, right? Society is hierarchical meaning it has different stages that people should kind of be appointed to, right? So somebody who believes society should be hierarchical believes that each of these people ought to be in the places that they are, right? That nobody should complain about where they are, that that's the rightful, natural order of things. Just accept it, right? This, of course, leads to the view that certain groups are inferior. Again, groups based on race, religion, national origin, often including sexism as well, right? Like, usually the assumption with SDO is that women are inferior to men, just period. Anyway, they generally feel anger at efforts to make society more lateral, right? So anything involving equity or trying to, say, give a few more resources to people who have less, they're going to be opposed to that very aggressively. Also, interestingly, right, this isn't just something that's found in a tiny, tiny minority of people and, otherwise is absent. We actually can induce temporarily a sense of social dominance orientation in people by just kind of boosting their ego, right? It's very small and it's temporary, but I think it goes to show that essentially this is, to some extent, part of human nature. It's scary, but yeah. Anyway, those are the two things, RWA, or right-wing authoritarianism, and SDO, or social dominance orientation. Those are two of the options for the project, so keep that in mind. Anyway, moving on. So, what do we have next here? If we go back to the lesson, there are 2 videos here to round things out before we get to our ticket out the door. This first one, by the same guy that does the Crash Course Psychology series, Hank Green, right? He also does a Crash Course Philosophy series. Now, normally I don't directly tackle philosophy in this course because it's a psychology course, but with this video, I think it is important to explore essentially what justice is, right? And this video does a really good job of that. Specifically, I'm sorry I did not note this in the comments here, but specifically, if you're going to watch this video, right, it's not going to load for me here properly because of the service I'm using, but if you're going to watch this video, I want you to kind of go roughly from about 1 minute 42 seconds to, let's make sure we get the right thing here, roughly 1 minute 42 seconds to Sorry, this is one of those things that I really should have had beforehand, right?
Is the right not to be interfered with, not to
Give me
be
a second.
stopped from pursuing the things you need. So in this view, I can't prevent you from trying to fulfill your needs, but I don't have to help you fulfill them either. By contrast, you might believe in positive rights. If you have a positive right to something, you need to do it. But that's exactly what the government does when it takes taxes from those who have more in order to assist those who have less. So you see what I mean? When people talk about taxes and healthcare and income inequality, they're really talking about justice.
So yeah, basically take that from roughly 1:42 to 6:40, so roughly 5 minutes, right? So again, 1:42 to 6:40, that's what you're looking for. You can watch the whole video if you want. It's interesting. It's just not required for this class. It's a lot of philosophy stuff that maybe you don't need for this class. Anyway, then there's a response from Hank Green's brother, who happens to be the author of a book called The Fault in Our Stars, which was made into a movie of the same name. Maybe you've heard of it, right? And he talks a little bit about something called the just world fallacy. This is essentially a belief that the world tends to always be inherently just in such a way that good people have good things happen to them and bad people have bad things happen to them. And, you know, this might seem intuitive, right? Kind of like karma, right? But what can happen is that if you say, for example, have a seemingly good person have a number of bad things happen to them, what do you think will happen? Well, some people, a small number of people, will correct their view and say like, oh, well, I guess the world doesn't work that way. Dang. But a lot of people will be like, oh, well, there must be something they're doing wrong, right? This stuff wouldn't be happening to them if they were being a good person, right? So we try to correct, right? Because we want to maintain that just world belief that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. The other Green brother talks about this here. Check it out, please. It's an interesting video, relatively short. And then the final part is just the ticket out the door. A few questions, multiple choice questions about the stuff that I went over here. So if you were paying attention here, I know it's a little rapid, but it's hard to fit everything into a 15-minute video. But if you were paying attention here, you should be well equipped for the ticket out the door. If you still have questions about it, please, please, please come see me. Otherwise, goodbye.